Case file number 3515. Written by Amazing Blue Dart. My 7-year-old knows better. It happened around 6 years ago. Took my son, 7, and daughter, 10, to Niagara Falls for a long weekend. We find a campground a few miles out of town, get set up, and spend the day roaming around the falls and being tourists. It gets dark, and we decide to head back to camp. We're on the highway, traveling around 70 miles per hour, when my son starts complaining that doors are open. We need to stop and check them. There's no warning lights, and I couldn't hear any weird wind noises, so I told him everything was fine, and we'd be back to the campsite soon. Kids, what are you gonna do? He keeps this up, just saying something's wrong, and will I please pull over? I tell him not to worry, these things happen. There's no reason to be concerned because we are safe in every way and only have a little ways to go. Right then, a couple deer ran across the highway directly in front of us. Screaming the only way you can scream when faced with your imminent demise, somehow I managed to swerve out of the way, clipping a good-sized deer on the driver's side. The kids were freaked the hell out, as was I. My son turns to me as we're pulled over looking at the car and says, "I knew something would happen. I could feel it. We should have pulled over." I agreed and said I'd never ignore him again. Cut to last summer. I'm getting ready to go on a golf weekend with my buddies. My son comes up to me and says, "Dad, don't go. I had a dream you were at the Cape, where we're golfing, and a red Saab crashed into you and you died. I've had this dream for the past 4 nights, so please don't go." I still feel like I dodged a bullet. Premonition powers do seem to strike or be more potent in young children, and I think the mind is still developing enough where as you get older, the pathways solidify. You can still form new one. It's neuroplasticity, I believe it's called, but it's not as fluid. It's like a river that is just purely water, but eventually as you get older, it turns more like to oil and then tar and sludge and just thicker. So changing its orientation or even trying to scoop anything out becomes much harder. And you can fight against it, and you should, but yeah, I think children are blessed in that way. And that means if a child in sincerity is warning you, probably a good idea to pay attention. I mean, unless there's some extreme reason you can't. And how proud and just amazed, in awe of your child would you be if they save your life through a premonition warning like this, and possibly twice, although you can't confirm the second time, but I believe your child. Well done. Welcome, I'm Paul, this is Dave. Today I have 13 Glitch in the Matrix and paranormal stories for you. My favorite story involves flesh. Let's get to it. Case file number 3516, written by Numb Bones. When a scar learned to interfere. When my boyfriend N was in 5th grade, he was woken from a sound sleep. He said there was no noise or movement or anything, he just woke up all of a sudden. He turned on the light by his bed to investigate what had woken him up, and happened to look down at his lap. His right knee was laid open to the bone. The cut was just above and to the left of his kneecap, about 2 inches in length. He could actually see his cartilage and the inner workings of his knee, and there was not a drop of blood, just a large, clean cut. So he got up, showed his mom and stepdad. They closed it up with some superglue and investigated his bed to see if maybe there was a piece of glass or a needle or something that might have cut him. There was nothing to be found. The scar from the incident is huge. It's around 2 inches long by ½ an inch wide. It is the typical silvery color that old scars take on. It's very, very smooth and completely dead to sensation. Fast forward to last fall. We've been together for 5 years at this point, and I've heard the story and speculated on what might have happened. One night, N and I were messing around with our sound system, which suddenly stopped working. For some reason, during our messing around, N happens to put his thumb over the end of an input cable. we immediately hear the voices of two women come over our speakers. He takes his thumb off, the voices stop. Back on, the voices come back. Off on, no voices, voices, no voices, voices. I even try putting my thumb over the input to see what happens, and there is a little bit of feedback, but nothing near as loud or clear as when N touches the cable. It seemed to be some sort of talk radio program, but with no commercial breaks. We listened for a good 5 minutes. The woman seemed to be discussing some sort of relationship problem. If it was a radio station, it was nothing that we would normally pick up in our area. After a while, I got freaked out, and we just fixed the stereo and tried to forget about it. Fast forward again to last month. N just got a fancy new laptop. One night, as we were sitting around, N on the couch with the laptop, me on the desktop, he says, "Hey, check this out." I look back at him over my shoulder. His laptop is scooted back so that the edge of the keyboard is right against his stomach. He begins slowly pushing the laptop out towards his knees. As soon as the screen gets to his kneecap, right above where his scar from the 5th grade nighttime incident is, his laptop screen goes crazy. It was perfectly clear until it got to his knees, and then the colors went off. Lines appeared all over the screen. It was distorted to the point you couldn't tell what had been on the screen. As soon as he moved the screen away from his knees, it reverted to normal. He did this again, and it kept doing the same thing. Fine away from his knees, distorted near the knees. He said he had noticed it earlier, and he'd even tried it on the laptops of a few of his friends while he was at work, and the same thing happened with all of them. I have no idea what possible explanation there could be for all these incidents, and I can't help but think they're all related. I believe in extraterrestrials, but I highly doubt they are capable, would be interested in traveling to our planet, especially to mess with an 11-year-old's kneecap. So, I tend to be a skeptic when it comes to abduction, but if all these incidents are connected, aliens are the only explanation that fits. I mean, yeah, we're all thinking aliens, what else could it be? The only other thing I can think of is not aliens, just the government doing some sort of test. Obviously there's some device that was implanted in beneath the scar into the flesh. The fact there was no blood or anything indicates it was very surgical. I don't know if he was abducted, taken to a clean surgical room, where there's even like suction to remove excess blood, although I hear that scars don't form so much if they're using a scalpel, but I guess if the wound is large enough, there's no way to avoid that. But one way or another, it's just perfectly clear this was either the government or aliens. One way or another, there was some will or mind involved in trying to spy on you, gather data, maybe even send a signal. Like, if you hold up your phone next to your speakers, the signal, which isn't even very strong from your phone, it's just a few watts, will actually mess with the electronics and I think even the magnet in your speakers. So, same thing with a computer or a screen or anything like that. These devices don't have to be strong to interfere with electronics. If you ever approach electronics and they buzz out around you, you might have something in you that you don't want to be there. My question then is, though, what do you do if you have this? Do you go to a doctor and try to have it removed? If it is alien, then, well, it wouldn't necessarily prove aliens because if they're smart, they would implant a device manufactured with materials made here. So maybe it's advanced, but it would still, they wouldn't use their own materials unless they don't care about being found out. But by everything going on, I'd think that they do care. They don't want to be known, at least not to a large population. If they show themselves accidentally or on purpose to a single person, people can say, shout to the world, but no one's going to listen, or at least not enough people. A small segment will, but it's not enough to make a difference. The media isn't going to go and say, yeah, aliens have arrived because one person has an advanced device in their leg. Maybe they'll be curious about it, but not enough. Case file number 3517, written by Damage My Calm, the Grey Collector at Clearwater Lake. My family owns a cabin in northern Minnesota near a lake. I think it's called Clearwater Lake, but I could be wrong about that. Anyways, he was spending about a week by himself up there, just doing some maintenance to the place and taking a little bit of time to himself. Our cabin is pretty old and is built to sleep a good amount of people. The first room you enter is the kitchen. Immediately to your right is the snoring room, named as such due to its location away from other bedrooms. The living room is directly through the kitchen. Attached to the living room are several other bedrooms, the bathroom, patio, etc. My father was by himself, so chose the snoring room to sleep in. One night, he woke up in the snoring room around the middle of the night and noticed a respectable amount of white light spilling underneath the closed bedroom door. He got up, thinking that he might have left the stove light on, or maybe the refrigerator door opened or something. Whatever it was, he had decided to get up and turn the light off. So he gets out of bed and opens the door to the kitchen. What he sees is that the light is emanating from underneath the kitchen table. He cannot see what is creating the light due to a plastic flower print tablecloth that is covering the table and almost reaches the floor. He cannot fathom what might be creating the light, but at the same time, he thought he might have dropped a flashlight or something logical like that. He approaches the table and pulls up the tablecloth. The light source was attached to a silvery suit that was being worn by a roughly 2-foot gray humanoid creature. Seriously. The little gray man was holding some sort of tray that had small objects from the kitchen on it. It had large black eyes, gray skin, no hair, and a somewhat larger cranium than would have been expected. That's all the details my father remembers about the creature, as he immediately dropped the tablecloth, bolted back to his bedroom, and slammed the door. Once back in bed, he pulled the covers over his head, terrified, and not believing what was going on. He was closing his eyes so that he could not see the light anymore, and kept telling himself that it didn't happen, and that he was dreaming, so he should just concentrate on going back to sleep. As he is trying to forget what had just happened, he hears the door handle to his room jiggle, then the creaking of the door opening very slowly, then nothing. He's terrified out of his mind at this point, so much so that he is not willing to push the covers off his face. He's still listening for something, but can't hear anything. He starts to feel pressure changing near the foot of his bed. The pressure slowly increases until what he describes as the weight of a small dog standing near his feet on the bed. The creature takes a step closer to him, and he feels a touch on his leg. He moves his leg violently away from the touch, hears a soft thud on the floor, his door slam, then nothing. By the way, he knows he wasn't dreaming because he didn't get any sleep the rest of the night. Oh, and I should probably mention that my father is not at all superstitious. To this day, he does not believe in ghosts, spirits, demons, or even extraterrestrials, but he doesn't know what the hell this was. Case file number 3518, written by Famine. The Scream Through Snowy Years. When I was 8 or 9 years old, during the winter, I remember something that will always stick with me. My dad had gone outside to burn the papers. This was during late December to early January, and the sun had already set. It was snowing hard enough that you couldn't see more than maybe 150 to 200 feet ahead. Anything further was just a white haze from lights on buildings nearby. I remember back at that time I was watching out the window, waiting for my dad to come back inside when I saw him come back into the house running. As I saw him running, I thought nothing of it. I just figured he was cold and wanted to get back inside as quickly as he could. This was not the case at all. I remember vividly that once he came inside, he screamed for my mom in a tone I haven't heard from him very often, to call 911. When my mom asked what happened, he told her that he could hear a woman screaming for help somewhere off in the darkness. I went outside and I could audibly hear her as well. The state police showed up, as well as a local EMS team, to search for this woman, which they heard as well. The search lasted for 8 hours, about 3 hours after my father first heard the screams for help. They had gradually gotten quieter until they simply ceased. No one was ever found, not a body, not a sign of anything happening, nothing. After all was said and done, no one was reported missing in the area, and no body was ever discovered. Fast forward 10 years, a local hunter stumbles upon the skeletal remains of human origin. He calls the police, and the story takes off in the local newspapers and news agencies. My father, of course, remembered that day very clearly and called the state police. The reason being was that local news had reported that the state police had written off the skeletal remains to the 1972 flood. My father pleaded for them to at least investigate to some extent, but they seemed convinced they were correct. To this day, who we heard has never officially been found, but I'll never forget her voice. The scream seemed to echo in my ears, rippling off the hazy air. The sound of real fear and terror is something I will never forget. Extra backstory. During the 1972 flood, dozens if not hundreds of caskets came up out of the ground and floated down the river, dumping bodies all over the valley in which I live. There have been cases of other remains found, which means it's plausible that they never did find the woman that I heard. However, to me, it just seems like they weren't willing to investigate it, nor do I believe the state police have vast resources in my area, due to the fact that I live in a small rural area. I believe it's foxes can emit a sound if they cry out. Different animals can make human-like screaming sounds for hours and hours, and also have officials involved. You'd think if you call the police and everything, they would know about potential animals that could make this sound, and it doesn't sound like you're in the middle of a forest, you know? So, could it have been a wild animal? Yes. Do I think it was? I don't know. My first guess was actually multi-universal. The scream was from a different universe. That's why you couldn't find it. Like, if you hear a scream, it shouldn't be too hard over hours to try to locate where it is, because that means it's still nearby enough. Maybe if it was in an apartment or something, but it would be too muffled, not loud enough to hear, I think, in that case. I was just thinking different universe, but then you speak about remains, so maybe this wasn't even a glitch. Maybe this was just creepy beyond belief. Imagine being in an environment where you feel like you need to scream for help for hours, and no one comes to help. Not that no one tried, at least that's good, but I think I'll simply choose to believe that this was the remains that were found were indeed from maybe a casket that overflowed, and it was just, I don't know how old the remains were and everything, but yeah, let's just go with that, because the other option to consider is not something you want to consider. Case file number 3519, written by Skinavi. 6 months in Philadelphia heat. To begin, my family works in the funeral business. Not a funeral home, but the business. Headstones, digging, cemeteries, vaults, etc. I grew up on the trucks with my dad, cleaned up flowers at the cemetery for a few bucks or a chocolate bar. My dad would ask me to keep an eye out for funerals while he got graves ready, and I would yell, "Here comes the peanut gallery," as I saw the hearse coming down the street. Needless to say, I was never freaked out by cemeteries or death-related subjects. With that being said, in around the year 2000, my Aunt Carol died from breast cancer. Of course, I was upset, even more so considering she was my favorite aunt, but I went to her funeral, paid my respects, cried it out, but as a 12-year-old, I didn't really understand the physical aspect and permanence of it all. Now, my aunt's wishes were not to be buried underground. She and my uncle owned a campground in the mountains of Pennsylvania, and with the proper permits, my uncle got permission to create a small family cemetery on the property, which my dad helped him clear out and set up. With her not wanting to be buried, my dad began designing a mausoleum made for her. Not one of the house-locking ones, just an above-ground plot for her and my uncle, basically. And since my dad had connections, her body was stored in a columbarium in the Philadelphia area, where we lived, until it was finished. It turned out nice for my sisters and I, because we could go visit her, put flowers, say a prayer, whatever, without having to drive a few hours to the Poconos. Now, one day, my dad asked me if I want to go visit Aunt Carol. Of course I say yes, and hop into my dad's Chevy Suburban with him. My aunt died a few days after Christmas, and this was about July from what I remember. A beautiful day. We drive to the cemetery, and the cemetery hands are surrounding the columbarium where my aunt is being stored. My dad starts talking to them like I've seen a million times, didn't think anything of it, figuring it's just a friendly chat. I get out of the truck to stretch, thinking we're going to be there a while. my dad tells me to get back into the truck. Turns out he wanted me in the truck so I wasn't in the way of the cemetery workers as they opened the columbarium, carried my aunt's casket, opened the back doors of the truck, and put my aunt's casket in the back of our truck. This was not, in my opinion, visiting my Aunt Carol. Now mind you, I've been around dead bodies before, but not one of my loved ones personally. Not my favorite aunt, who, God rest her soul, had been dead and rotting for the past 6 months in the Philadelphia heat and humidity, and smelled. The smell, I will never forget it. The distinct smell of death that is indescribable. Never had I been tricked into coming with my father to put a dead family member 6 inches away from me in the back of our family vehicle. We started driving. The 20-minute car ride home was the quietest I'd ever been in my entire life. I could hear the casket slide slightly with each stop, even though it was tied in. The smell wouldn't escape even with all the windows open. My dad driving, with the look of not having a care in the world. I am 13 years old, frozen with anxiety. We pull into our driveway. I run inside and instantly start crying in the bathroom. My dad comes upstairs. What's wrong? What kind of question is that? Upon explaining that he never told me what we would be doing at the cemetery, I was a little freaked out. He explained he didn't think it would bother me, he was used to it and he was sorry. Turns out in the end, we only stopped home because he forgot something, and he had fully planned on driving me and dear old Aunt Carol to the Poconos, a few hours, to surprise me with a visit to see my uncle. A nice day trip to the mountains. I politely turned down the offer. With that being said, I love you, Aunt Carol, and I still love my dad, even if he is a little confused about what is normal. But the one thing I never told my dad. When the casket was in the back, I could hear whispers. Maybe they just were in my mind, but that mixed with the smell drove me into some sort of lucid insanity. Case file number 3520, written by Sky Deep Sky. The branch, the truck, and the moon. When I was around 19, I had a girlfriend who lived in a small village about 10 kilometers away from me. To get there, I had to drive down into a valley and then back up the other side. The road winds through a forest with tight turns climbing up the valley. On my way to her place one day, I spotted a huge branch lying across the road and slowed way down so I wouldn't hit it. I almost came to a complete stop when, suddenly, a semi-truck cut around one of the tight bends and nearly slammed into me. That branch probably saved my life right then and there. But that wasn't the strangest part of that particular day. Since I had to work the next day, I left her place sometime during the night. While driving home, I noticed a huge, stunning full moon shining through the treetops. It was so striking that I even stopped at one of the many viewpoints in our area to really take it in. The sight was incredible. The moon illuminated the entire valley under a clear night sky. Eventually, I continued on my way home. A few kilometers down the road, I saw the moon again, except this time, it wasn't full anymore. It was a new moon. That completely freaked me out. When I got home, I immediately looked up the moon phase for that night. It really was a new moon. So how the hell did I see a full moon? Case file number 3521, written by The Bewildered Badger. The Hymn at Midnight. My auntie and uncle went to America on holiday a good few years back, and it was only recently that my auntie told me about it. My auntie, uncle, and 2 cousins, at the time they were 3 and 4 years old, now 18 and 19, went on holiday to America. They booked a big house for 2 weeks that was an hour drive from the nearest town and backed out into a small wooded area. Whilst they were in the house, they only used 3 bedrooms the entire time, and there were 9 altogether. 1 room for the children, the other for my auntie and uncle, and the third they used to lay all their holiday clothes across the bed, rather than putting them in wardrobe. One night, about a week into the holiday, they were in bed and there was a sound at the bottom of the stairs. It woke my auntie up, but she shrugged it off and started to nod off again. A few seconds later, the same noise sounded at the bottom of the stairs, then again and again and again. It got louder until my auntie realized it was coming up the stairs very slowly. I remember her telling me that she felt paralyzed with fear because it wasn't one of those noises you would just shrug off thinking was your imagination. It was continuous and got louder and louder. She shook my uncle awake, and they lay there in silence until it came to the top of the stairs, no more than 5 meters from the bedroom door. My uncle got up and grabbed the baseball bat he had bought very early into the holiday when realizing how isolated the house was. They still have that bat in the house back at home now. He silently got up, slowly, and went over to the bedroom door. He flung the door open and there was nothing there, no sign of anyone on the landing. He then told my auntie to check on the children next door whilst he went and checked the rest of the house. After 10 minutes, my auntie had checked the children and sat waiting in the room. My uncle came back and told her everything was okay, except the ensuite in the room where they kept their clothes was locked. The room was only lockable from the inside and had no windows. My uncle then left the kids' room and went to the ensuite. He tried to open the door again and he had no luck. He then tried to budge the door by shoulder barging it, but nothing. After trying several times, he stood back and kicked the door until it opened, greeted by nothing but a breeze. He went in, and nothing in the ensuite was disturbed. Everything looked normal, as if no one had been in there. He felt total relief at the emptiness of the room, only until he looked up and saw a loft hatch that he hadn't seen before, and it was wide open. He froze with eyes fixed on the open hatch and looked into nothing but blackness. That was when my uncle left the room, went and got my auntie and cousins, got in the car, and drove to the nearest town for the rest of the night. In the morning, my uncle returned on his own to the house, having left my auntie and cousins at a cafe in town. He packed everything from the house swiftly into the car, and they didn't go back to the house for the remainder of the holiday. The mind stretches to imagine what could have been up there. Case file number 3522, written by Anonymous. Between the sound and the silence. I was driving back home from Six Flags a few months ago with my best friend. It was daylight still, and we were going back and there was a street where the speed limit was 35 miles per hour, so I could see everything in case someone tried to run across the street, since there were houses on both sides. Anyway, as I was driving, I noticed a white, large dog, fully grown, standing on the right side of the street and a lady on the left side with another dog. I didn't pay much attention, but then I saw the dog on the right started running across the street, and I knew I was about to hit him with my car. I see the dog stop in the middle of the road in front of my car as I'm 1 second away from hitting it. His head met eye level with my headlights. My best friend screamed terrified because she loves animals. Well, my car passed the dog, and there was nothing at all, nothing happened. I felt no impact and heard no dog sounds. The car felt as if there was nothing that got in front of it. I looked in my rearview mirror and my best friend looked in the mirrors also. There was no sight of a dog, or a lady either. They weren't there anymore. After that, we got home safe and terrified still, and every day now I can still see the dog's face as he turns towards my headlight, knowing it's about to get run over. Case file number 3523, written by Lala6633. The horn that interrupted the hunt. I lived in a small town and used to be able to roam around on my bike or to my friend's house whenever I wanted without much concern from my parents. One time when I was 13 or so, I was walking home from my friends at like 9:30 or 10 in the summer. I cut across this big bank parking lot between two buildings. As I was walking, I heard someone turn the corner in the distance behind me. Then they start jogging towards me. I am still walking, but too scared to turn around to see who it was or to run. Just as he was about 50 feet away, a car pulls up at the end of the parking lot and the horn honks, and his friend yells to him. We both turned at that point. He turned and ran to the car. I turned to see what the honk was and to see who the person was. I was hoping it was my friend or something explainable, but it was some guy in his 20s in a cut-off shirt. I know in my gut that if that car didn't come, or if he caught up, it wouldn't have been good for me. And at 13, I probably just looked old enough to not look like a little kid, but just young enough to be vulnerable. Case file number 3524, written by Anonymous. 8 shadows rising from rust. It was the middle of winter, and just like a Canadian winter, there was snow everywhere. A friend of mine who was, shall we call Bill, and I were hanging out and decided we'd go exploring. Not too far from my house are a series of quarries. We had visited one of them more than 10 times, and realizing we'd never been to any of the other ones, we thought we'd try something new. So we're driving in my old boat of a car. Think of cars you'd see in Dirty Harry movies, and passing the first quarry to another one a few kilometers up the road. It's like 10 p.m. at this point, but the gate to this quarry is open, so we get out of the car to investigate. After we tore off the no trespassing sign and tossed it into the forest, stupid us figured they wouldn't be able to charge us with trespassing then. We then drive down this dark road which is more like tire tracks in the snow with only one headlight to guide us, through what we expected to be a quarry. However, as we drive around, we're passing huge walls of cut wood on either side of the car. At this point, I'd like to mention the road we're on was only wide enough for one vehicle to drive down, meaning either we'd have to find an area to do a U-turn, or we'd have to reverse out. Anyways, as we continue down this path, we find a derelict school bus just sort of trashed in the middle of the road, forks to go around said bus. We thought we saw some movement in the bus, but figured it was just reflections of the headlights. We also passed one of those portable offices you see at construction sites. Still, our headlights are the only source of light here. As we followed the road, I thought of something. If anyone wanted to trap us here, they'd only have to bring a vehicle in behind us. With the possibility of someone in the bus, that freaked us out. I tell my friend to hop in the back seat with the tire iron and hide there so he can get the jump on anyone if they try anything funny. The trail branches a couple of times, and ours ends up looping around. We decided we've had enough and start driving back. When we come to the bus, there are a few lights on, and what looks to be about 8 people in it. Now, this bus was trashed. It didn't have tires on it, and there were no other construction vehicles nearby. This quarry or lumber camp is about a 2 hours walk from the nearest house, and at this point it's 11:30 at night. As we're passing the bus, the people start climbing out and running at the car. At this point I floored it and drove out of there as fast as I could, the whole time praying I wouldn't find a vehicle trapping us in there. Luckily, nothing was in front of us and the gate was still open, so we pulled out on the main road and sped away and never went back. Case file number 3525, written by The Soil Worker 69, through Verdant Fields. I took the exit from the Snellweg highway to go to a friend, a trip to a town I do weekly if not daily. The road after the highway is an 80km/h road, N-Weg, of a few kilometers and miles through the woods. Nothing unusual here in Newfoundland, you just need to be careful when crossing deer as the lighting conditions are adapted to the animals. Green color, very dim. Also worth mentioning is that the drop zones from the market garden operations in 44 are very close and around this forest. So I take a right from the off-ramp and start driving through the forest. I was feeling it took longer than usual, and exactly on that point, I could see the end of the forest, so I was relieved that there were no accidents with animals, and from there, I should be almost into town. Except when I came closer to the end of the forestry, I was back at the highway exit where I had just taken a right. I obviously didn't turn around on the road. I wish I paid attention to how much time I had spent driving on that road, but I floored it back to my home, terrified. Case file number 3526, written by Burn the Red Rose, a spinal tap before the light. When I was 4, I collapsed in the living room while playing with some toys. I wasn't really breathing, and my eyes were rolled back into my head. I was turning blue halfway to the hospital. From the outside, the doctors ran tests upon tests, and I think, my parents won't say, I actually flatlined at one point. From my side, I don't remember collapsing. but I do remember being in the dark. No light, no gray, black everywhere. Someone took my hand and told me it was time to go. I asked where we were going, and the voice said we were going to see my parents. We walked for what felt like a really long time. My mom and dad didn't really have any faith of any kind, really, but right after, the doctors told them that they would prepare me for a spinal tap next. Dad told my mom that they should pray over my body. I can't explain what happened next, nor can they. I woke up, jumped off the bed, and started running around. I was so happy to see my parents and light. So I had a quick little thought reading this story, in that if you die, there's quantum immortality, maybe not, maybe there's religion, maybe Christianity is true, Catholic, I don't know, one religion of some kind, and you wake and then there's God and heaven and all that, or now you wake in the real world from the simulation, okay, or something else we haven't even considered. But in all these cases, when you die, then you transition. So in the case of people who die, but then come back even minutes later, which does happen rarely, but it can happen, where do you go in that interim? Do you actually awake in the real world or go to heaven or wherever, whatever happens? And then when you're revived, you're sent back, but the memory's re-erased? Maybe. I'm just considering, how does those rules work? Or what about quantum immortality? Is there a buffer of time? Maybe it doesn't happen instantaneously? Maybe that's even why there's a dead pocket server, because you're there in the buffer between where it's permanent in the world you came from, and then you're transitioned after. And I guess that makes sense, because some deaths would be, 100% you can never be revived. There's certain things that can happen to the human body where, good luck, doctors. But in cases like this, where there's a chance to be revived, maybe you just go to a different place temporarily, and they wait and see what happens. There has to be some kind of buffer, which to me explains the dead pocket server or world pretty well. Pretty cool. Glad that you came back all happy and everything. It's a good ending. Case file number 3527, written by the Solarium. Sealed against all of yesterday. Hi everyone. I've been having horrible dust allergies and went to the pharmacy to pick up some antihistamines. I brought the box home, opened it up along a perforated edge, took a pill, and put it on the counter with the rest of our medicine. This morning, when I went to pick up the box, the perforation was perfectly intact, and there was no tearing or signs of being opened anywhere else. It was a totally fresh, unopened box. I opened it again, and when I took out the sleeve of pills, the one I took yesterday was still missing. So the box was fully sealed shut, but still missing the one I took yesterday. There's no way we had an unopened box at home already, as we've just moved internationally within last week and didn't bring any allergy medicine, and had never purchased this brand or any other antihistamines in the country we now live in. My husband, who is incredibly skeptical of glitches and other unexplainable things, even acknowledged it was weird and inspected the box himself and couldn't find any explanations. Now time for the jokes of the day. It's been 20 years since I joined the gym, but there has been zero progress. Tomorrow, I'll go there personally to see what's going on. Germans must have short phone numbers. I asked this girl for her number and she told me 9. I bought a dog from a blacksmith. As soon as I got him home, he made a bolt for the door. Very talented. What do you call a priest that becomes a lawyer? A father-in-law. Why are there no brown bears at the North Pole? They're afraid of the ice. Video up here. YouTube thinks you'll like it. Check it out. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe. I'll see you next time.